Today I have with me again Elizabeth Fields with Jackson Fields Consulting. Sharity and Jackson Fields are excited to be partnering for our intensive, which we're going to talk about a little bit later. But we're also partnering on this three-part series. And Elizabeth, I don't know if you want to just say hi.
Yeah, hi everybody. Great to see you. Ditto on Carol. Thank you for joining the live seminar today and our webinar, and to those that are going to be joining online. Great to have you here. We look forward to a really productive discussion.
Yeah, and one of the advantages of being live and being here in person is that you get to ask questions. So feel free, go ahead and put your questions in the chat if you have questions, or just go ahead and unmute yourself and feel free to, ask that question as we go along. Happy to answer any questions you might have. So today we are going to talk about securing major gifts, and specifically about talking about major gifts officers. But first, I want to just give you a little bit of information about Sharity, where I work. Some of you know Sharity already, but we are a global organization that focuses on helping nonprofits scale. The other thing that we really specialize in is helping you understand how donors work and what they're looking for, so that as you start to grow and build your organization, you have the infrastructure to be able to continue to build that major fundraising campaign, have the money you need, make sure that you're meeting the need that you're identifying, and you can continue to grow your organization. And this is just a little bit of an idea of where we work. We work in 31 different countries. Some of these you can't see because they're through the Caribbean, but do a lot of work across the globe. And just a few of the things that we do, we help you get ready for that major gifts campaign. We can help you with donor identification and evaluation. So if you have a handful of donors and you want to know what strategy you should have, we can put them through a wealth screening and help you get a really good idea of what that ask amount should be, as well as whether or not they're a good prospect for your organization. We do economic impact, both on your outcome measures as well as capital campaigns and operating, and the impact that it has on your community. We also do assist with fundraising and campaign management. And then, of course, any kind of communication, research, and thought leadership projects. So it's a great quote: generosity is contagious, but it starts with one person. And donors don't like to be alone, but we do have to start somewhere. And we have to make sure that we have a culture of giving in our organization. So many organizations, as we talked about last time, get stuck in this annual fund cycle. They get focused on year to year. They're so busy just surviving from one year to the next, it feels like a hamster wheel, and that they can't get off that wheel and they cannot ever really grow because they're so busy just meeting ends meet. So what we want to do is take you beyond that. And anybody who's worked with Sharity will recognize these 5 components. And this is what the research tells us that donors are looking for. The more of these that you have, the more successful you will have fundraising. And it doesn't matter how large your organization is. It doesn't matter what your plan is or how much you want to grow. If you don't have these 5 components, your plan and your strategy is not going to be as successful as if you take the time to build these 5 components. And just briefly, we're talking about an organizational plan that is very clear, that not only the staff understands where you're going and what will happen when you get there, but your board and your donors can see it and understand it as well. If you're having issues with board engagement, the number one challenge that I see with boards not being engaged or not opening doors is because you do not have a clear plan that they understand and can articulate, and that they feel confident that their friends will want to invest in. The next one is that 3-year pro forma, having that understanding of what that plan will cost. And this is where a lot of organizations get hung up. And I know I've worked with some of you on the call today, trying to develop those 3-year pro formas and helping them really figure out what is it that it's going to cost so that we know how much money we need to raise. That 3-year pro forma becomes a 3-year fundraising campaign. We're going to talk a little bit more about that today. The next one is outcomes, and outcomes are not outputs. If you've seen my outcome versus output, or outcomes versus output webinar, you'll know that outcomes are what is long-term change. And if you are successful with your plan, what will happen as a result? Not how many people you're going to serve, not how many pounds of food you're going to give away, but how many lives will be impacted and how will they be impacted? What will be different because your organization was successful? The next piece is the team, making sure that you have the team to pull the plan off. And do you have enough donors? Am I the only donor you're talking to, or do you have enough donors that you're going to be able to raise this money, not just from me, but from a group of people? Today, we're really going to be focusing on number 4. We're going to be talking about a specific person in the team, and that is major gifts officer. So we assess these things for every single one of our clients, and we assess them because when you start talking about major donors, not people who give you a one-time $50 gift, but people who pause and really consider whether or not to make a stretch gift to your organization, those people want to invest. And what I mean by invest is they want to know that their money will have the type of impact that they're looking for philanthropically. So they want to know, what are you going to do with the money? They want to know that the money that you're asking for is enough money. And we're seeing this a lot, especially with capital campaigns across the country. Construction costs have gone through the roof, and all of a sudden it's not enough money, the original campaign goal. And I'm seeing campaigns go from 10 million to 40 million, or 75 million to 125 million. They're doubling and tripling sometimes. They also want to know that you've got that right team and that your board is 100% behind it, and that they're not the only ones that you're asking for a check. They want to know that their peers are donating, that they trust in you and your organization as well. Part of the person that they want to be able to trust in too is the executive director. They want to know that the person who's heading up this team is someone that they really can trust to pull this off. So we talked about this a little bit last week, but I think it bears repeating, because as we start to talk about major gifts, it's not an either or, it's an and. So you don't want to have a major gifts program or an annual fund campaign. You want both. But it's really important to understand that there is a significant difference between a major gifts campaign and an annual fund campaign. The strategy is different, the approach is different, the whole philosophy is different, which is why you have to have a different type of person running a major gifts campaign with a different type of skill set. So major gifts look into the future. This is why we have to have a 3-year pro forma. We have to have a 3-year plan at a minimum. You have to be able to say to your donors, look, we need more than just a one-time gift. We need you to make an investment, a multi-year investment. Whether you pay it out over multiple years or whether it's a gift that can sustain us for multiple years, we want you to understand what your investment is going to do. It's going to take a lot of effort, and it's going to take a lot of cultivation to get that major gift. The annual fund campaign is very different. It focuses 1 year at a time. And this is what we typically see with nonprofits that just do like a month before year end, they do their budget for the next year, and then they develop what the gap analysis, the gap is, what they know they're going to be bringing in versus what they don't have. And then that don't have number ends up being their annual fund. Well, that's not a healthy way to run an organization. It's certainly not a healthy way to run a business. But annual fund campaigns, in and of themselves, are not a bad thing. But they tend to focus what are you going to bring in over the next year and that lower tiered gifts. What are those annual donors? So instead of thinking about it in the dysfunctional sense of it's 1 year at a time, it's real sense of urgency because you have to fill this gap, think about a healthy annual fund campaign is really focused on the smaller tier gifts, the money from people who are going to give once a year or maybe even one time. Maybe there are gifts that come in that are smaller that you then identify that person has a potential for a major gift and you cultivate them and bring them up through the cycle. Does anybody have any questions before I go on that? Okay. So a little bit more about major gifts versus annual fund and how they are fundamentally different. Major gifts take 12 to 18 months, sometimes even 24 months. So you have to be very patient. This is not a one and done. This is not invite someone to an event and have them write a $100,000 check. It takes time to develop a relationship, help them understand what your organization does, how you're good stewards of the money. A lot of times I think Elizabeth mentioned in the last webinar, give a small gift to see how you handle it, and then gift you with larger amount. So you have to understand that this is the marathon. This is not the sprint. It's typically small hosted events with peers, and you usually do not charge for the event. The idea is to cultivate and to steward. It's not to bring money in. It's to think about that long-term goal. It's about deepening their engagement. And then major gifts look to do customized asks. So no two asks are going to be exactly alike. They're going to be completely specialized. They're going to be customized to that donor, depending on the level. And they're going to be stewarded individually for the most part. Annual fund, on the other hand, their events are there to raise funds. They're also there to engage new donors. You might also see your direct mail campaign as part of your annual fund campaign or social media. The asks tend to be more generic. They tend to be more larger groups of people. So think about annual fund as the masses. And then once you identify who in that mass pool that's giving has the potential for a major gift, they move over to the major gift. Again, it's a way to think of the two as partners, but not mutually exclusive. The challenge is when you only have an annual fund campaign, you never have that process in place to identify those people who have the potential to make a major gift, cultivate them, and then get them to the point where you do an ask. So the next little bit I wanted to just share with you is this idea of a capital campaign versus a comprehensive campaign. Now, a lot of times people will think about a capital campaign and they think it's for a building. And they think capital, meaning construction. But that's really not the modern term and how we think in the fundraising field of capital. We think of capital campaign as a fund that raised for growth. It could be for a building, but it could be an expansion of a program. It could be some infrastructure that you need, more technology. But it's kind of a one-time, a one and done. Once you raise the money, you're not going to have additional money ongoing for that. The comprehensive campaign, on the other hand, is where we include both your operating and your capital expenses. So A lot of my clients that I'm working with right now are doing comprehensive campaigns because it just makes more sense. I have one right now that they need $15 million over the next 3 years. 12 million of that, they know where the money's coming from. So their campaign will be a $15 million campaign with a fundraising goal of 3 million, if that makes sense. So it's above and beyond your operating, but it also includes your operating fund. So you're not having to single out that annual fund campaign. Those strategies become part of your comprehensive campaign. But as opposed to a capital where it's a one-time, we need $1 million to fund this effort of this renovation of a building, and we're going to raise that $1 million and then we're done. And a lot of times capital campaigns, especially in colleges, you'll hear the term rolling thunder, where they happen over and over again because they always have a building to fund. But it's just two different ways to think about major gifts campaigns. I should say you can't do either of them if you don't have accurate budgets, and you need 3-year pro forma regardless of which one you choose. So now we're going to talk a little bit about major gifts officers and why they are so unique. And I think this is where a lot of people get really confused, especially in the nonprofit sector, about development people. They think that if you throw the term out there, director of development, that everybody's the same. And you'll see these job descriptions where it will say they need to be a prolific grant writer, they need to have major gifts experience, they need to know how to do events, they need to have experience with working with boards. And I want you to step back for a second. I'm going to use some for-profit concepts so you can start to understand the difference between some of the different roles that we need to be thinking about as you start to grow and you start to have more specialization in your development department. Because if you come at this from, I just need a director of development, you're going to get into a lot of trouble. And what we see nationally, and this has been a trend for a long time, is most development people only stay around 18 to 24 months. Some will stay up to 3 years, but we see a significant turnover in development individuals. And a lot of it is the fact that they're being expected to do things that make them a generalist without the infrastructure, the support that they need to be able to succeed with the expectations that the nonprofit has. So that's why you keep, if you've had a cycle where you've lost directors of development, a lot of times this is why you're losing them. The other reason that I think nonprofits lose directors of development is because they don't hire people who can close. And what happens is they come in, they do low-hanging fruit, they handle whatever they can handle, and then all of a sudden they don't have any more tricks in their bag, and they end up leaving. What I found is that there are really the difference between what gets hired most of the time is that person who is great at a party. They are a social butterfly. They will go out to every event in the community. They'll work nights and weekends. They will network. They'll be at the chamber. They'll be, you name it. They're out there and everybody knows who they are. Everybody loves them. They're perky. They're really outgoing, and they never raise any money. And that's because if you're thinking about it from a for-profit perspective, this would be your community relations person. It is not your fundraiser. A lot of times nonprofits gravitate to the personality, and they don't understand that somebody who is a good networker or who is really well liked, and a lot of times you'll find that foundations will be the references on these individuals. And what happens is nonprofits don't ask the right questions, like, how much money did you personally raise last year? What did you hit your goal? What was your major gifts goal? What was your event goal? What's your successful ask ratio? Elizabeth, did you want to add something?
Yeah. Also, when you're asking those questions, is to ask specifics on how they did it. It's really, really important to have them walk through the process. That will give you a really good understanding of if they really understand the process.
Absolutely. And that is one of the questions I always ask when I'm interviewing major gifts officer is walk me through your last ask from the first time you met the person until you closed the ask, did the solicitation. And if they can't tell me that, I know that they don't know what they're doing, which again, they could be a really wonderful person. They're just not the right person for this seat on the bus. And so I see this type of person being hired all the time. And then what happens is other people see how well liked they are, and the other nonprofits come and kind of try to encourage that person to come over, or that person applies for an open position in another nonprofit that's making a little bit more money. And this is how you see somebody like this who really doesn't raise a lot of money ending up making a six-figure salary as a director of development someplace. But unfortunately, they really don't know how to do the actual ask. This is the other type of person, and this is the person that we're looking for. We want a project manager. We want somebody who understands that fundraising, marketing, um, that the process that has to go into raising major gifts and raising large sums of money is more project management. It's more like managing building a building than it is creating an event. You have to understand the big picture. Think about the difference between a bookkeeper and a CFO. A CFO has to be able to do strategy. A CEO has to be able to do strategy. A major gifts officer has to be able to see long term. They have to understand the strategy. They have to be able to drive the plan with their prospect pool forward. Now, not all major gifts officers are strategy people. Sometimes you have a chief development officer who is the strategy person, but they have to understand that there are certain tasks that have to happen at certain times. They have to be able to keep track of that. They have to manage that, and they have to manage it for a large number of people. I don't know, Elizabeth, if you want to add anything here.
Yeah. Additionally, you need to understand who is the best match to be during the external ask during this process too, because it isn't always the major gift officer. So they're project managing, but they're also identifying who's really going to come in and be the best relationship manager when they're actually managing the bigger picture.
Right. Yeah, because that might be a board member. It might be the executive director. It might be a peer who is part of a campaign cabinet. So their job is to be that traffic cop, to know who needs to be where, how that all needs to be positioned. It's a lot of moving parts. And you can see how this is a very, very different job than the person who is doing your direct mail and doing all of those other bits and pieces. And they're focused more on the smaller level donors. It's certainly not the person who's just going out and building relationships, where those relationships are really linked to them often and not the organization. So, what kind of job description do they have? First of all, they want to know that they want to know what's going to happen. They need to be able to communicate to the donor what will happen with their money, what the organization will do with the money that's donated. This person maintains a current knowledge of all the funding needs so that they can identify donors and the donors' desires. Hopefully, we're doing unallocated funds, but if it is restricted funding, we want to make sure that they can match all of those things. They identify prospective donors for the needs that the organization has or for that fundraising campaign or the funds level, the ask level. They plan that strategy from cultivation all the way through to gift closure. They implement that strategy. They coordinate with the person who's holding the little home events to working with putting the information into the donor database. Again, they're maintaining the relationships not just with the donors, they're also maintaining the relationships with those people who hold those relationships. There's a lot of moving parts that major gifts officers have to handle. And then they also have to be able to report their progress toward achievement. And a lot of organizations can't even really articulate how the progress is coming along, where the donors are in different parts of the cultivation cycle, where they are year to date, to get to goal. They have to have very clear metrics, how many people are in different giving categories. So they have to be able to report how they're doing to the board, to the CEO. They have to be able to keep the CEO in the loop in that cultivation process. And they have to understand that that reporting process is really important, especially if you have a campaign cabinet. They have to know what's going on and how we're progressing.
I'm going to add to that too. It's really, really important that tracking of that process, tracking of the donor cycle is critical, because earlier Carol had mentioned that there's the life cycle of, 8, 12, 18, 24 months to close by the time when you identify a major gift prospect to when you close a gift. And being able to show that progress is really critical, because a lot of times leadership and board of directors will often say, where's all the money? And you have to be able to go back and use this as a teachable moment of, here's the progress, here's the industry standard of what it happens, and showing that progress is going to be really, really important, because then it will show, why this works and why it's so important to the longevity of the organization.
Absolutely. So what should you be looking for when you're hiring a major gifts officer? They really need to have high emotional intelligence. And I can't stress enough that understanding how body language, how what you're doing impacts someone else, all of those things about being able to read people. Again, they don't need to be bubbly and outgoing and an extrovert. In fact, a lot of the really good major gifts officers that I've met have been people who had engineering degrees, and they were really kind of quiet, but they were really good at reading people, and they had really high emotional intelligence, and that really helped them in the ask and in that cultivation process. They would know when somebody was ready and when they weren't. They would be able to be open and honest, and donors would know that they're being transparent. There's not any kind of blowing smoke up somebody's or doing anything like that. It's just they're just a genuinely honest, intelligent person. They have to be able to remember faces, names, and personal details. So incredibly important. I am horrible at names. So I have little tricks that I do when I write down names and things on cards and stuff. But having that memory, or having some sort of way that they remember not just the faces and the names, but details about people. Because again, their job is to get to know these people, to get to know the details, when their birthday is, what their favorite flower is, what their dog's name is. All of those things mean a lot to people. They also need to be someone who expands their circle. Love of reading, this popular psychology books, but really somebody who is up to date on current events. They're going to be talking to people who are business owners, who are leaders in the community. They need to be articulate, not get into political discussions or anything like that, but they definitely need to be someone who has a broader circle than just coming to work and going home at night and then not, really understanding what's going on in the world. I know that I've been able to advise on some campaigns where understanding the impact of certain economic trends. We're getting ready to go into a presidential campaign cycle. That is going to have a significant impact on giving this year. They'll be giving, it's going to be different this year than it's ever been, because of some changes to where money goes and how people decide to give their money. But all of those things are really important to know. If we have some sort of major disaster, here in Central Florida, we had 2 years ago, we had horrible floods and hurricane. It was just not the time necessarily to ask. So your major gifts officer has to understand all of those things about people, about what's going on, about who they are, and what their interests are, and how that may impact their giving. They have to be really, really patient. That 12 to 18-month cycle can sometimes be really frustrating. And if you're thinking about your job being get in, get the event done, and get back out, this is not the job for you. I always think about major gifts like social change. You are working with someone, and if you're going to get them to the point where you're going to get them to give, especially when you hear about these $100 million gifts and things like that, that didn't happen overnight. Those are not, unless it was a Mackenzie Scott manna from heaven sort of thing, that rarely happens, right? So you have to be really patient, but I think above all else, you have to be sincere. If you're stopping by to check on somebody, you really need to care about how they're doing. If you are, I sent a sympathy card the other day, and I had students send sympathy cards, and it really meant a lot to the person. But it was also, I knew in my heart that this was sent from a very sincere place. It was not something that was done just because I'm trying to cultivate the gift, because they will figure that out.
I'm gonna add this to this too. When Carol was mentioning, knowing, being up to date on current events, knowing when to ask, when to show that. I mean, you need to be sincere and honest. I had a situation, this is a while ago, when I was working at a business school, went home, saw that there was a huge hurricane that, wiped out New Orleans, right? We all know that one. One of the gentlemen that I was cultivating at the time, to name a room, was a trustee at Tulane. I picked up the phone and said, "How you doing?" This, that, and the other with the school. I mean, it was a completely different institution, and he was quiet on the phone, like he couldn't even believe that I was calling and cared, right? And then the gift discussion stopped for a while because I knew that he had to concentrate on something else. You need to be able to pick up those signals too. It's okay sometimes if you have to slow it down because there was something that it was personal or happened professionally to them. It is really, really key to pick up on those signals.
Yeah. It's and that's what really makes a wonderful major gifts officer, is the ability to really care about people, to really care about and to understand and appreciate that what you're trying to get them to invest in is something you really believe about, but you're willing to develop that long-term relationship that will extend beyond you to the next person that might hold that relationship. But this is what makes a really, really good major gifts officer, is all of these things. So there was a study done where a small number of major gifts officers had a 78% higher odds of exceeding their fundraising goal than other major gifts officers. So what do you think was the one thing that made the difference? Anybody want to take a guess? They were actually able to do a lot of things that we were just talking about. Distilling information that is really relevant to the person, to the campaign, being able to articulate those outcome measures. I've seen people's faces light up when you're actually able to talk about outcomes as opposed to outputs. They can change your speaking style and behavior based on who they're meeting with. So if I'm meeting with someone and we're sitting at a country club overlooking the golf course and we're just sitting back and relaxing, I can change and sit and just relax and have a conversation. I don't have to be tense and like ready to go and have my presentation and, kind of whatever they need. I can adapt what I'm doing to be able to be with that person and be present with them, I think is probably the best way to put that. That thirst for learning. And the other thing that I do want to bring up is this ability to conduct themselves confidently. We talk about the Superman pose. If you've ever worked with me on doing an ask, I'll have you do the Superman pose. And there's research that shows that if you stand in that Superman pose with your arms at your side, feet planted, and breathe for 3 minutes, that you're more likely to be successful in the meeting than if you don't. Great TED Talk on that. But you have to be confident. You have to really, truly believe in what you're doing. You can't hesitate. And you need to know your information. You need to really be articulate about the information that you're sharing and how that information is relevant to the donor and what questions they may ask so that you aren't guessing, making things up, but you're truly giving them the information that they need and you're being very confident when you're presenting it. So these 4 things actually were identified as the things that really separate those that are more likely to exceed goal than those that don't. All right. So how many donors should a major, misspelling there, but how many donors should a major gifts officer have? So put in the chat, tell me, let's see some guesses here. What do you think? How many people should a major gifts officer have on their list? Like their caseload, I guess you could say. What's a good number? Somebody throw something in for me. Don't be shy. 75, Gail's. 50 or 100 is a big spread, Coco. Anybody else? All right. So actually, kind of both in the right area. There's a rule of thumb, no more than 100. 100 is a lot. It's a lot of people. You won't be doing something with every one of them, but the rule of thumb is if you have more than 100, then it's probably too many. It's time for another major gifts officer. So that's your point at which you probably want to be thinking about a second major gifts officer. All right. I'm going to go back to that for-profit example now, and I want to talk about how you, when you go into buy a car, buy a house, it doesn't really matter, any kind of large purchase, the process that you go through as a customer trying to get someone to sell you something. So when you walk into, let's just say it was just in Europe, and you walk into a high-end shop, the sales people are pretty adept in identifying who walks into that shop and who's a prospect and who's just browsing, right? They can tell from your body language. They can tell from a whole host of different things about whether or not you're a prospect or whether or not you are just coming in to test drive that new Ferrari. They're going to talk to you, right? They're going to talk to you. They're going to find out a little bit more about you, about your interests, about whether or not you are, this is going to be the right product for you. They may even demonstrate it. You might go for a test drive. They then validate that this is in fact what you want, make sure it's a good fit. Then you start the negotiation process, right? So you might negotiate on price, you might negotiate on warranty, I don't know, whatever it might be, right? And then eventually they close the sale, right? This is the sales cycle. When you start thinking about your fundraising, I want you to think about how are you moving people who are prospects? How are you bringing the prospects in to your organization? How are you moving them into a cycle that is clearly defined for your organization. So if you have a fundraising event, and let's just say you offer up tickets on the internet, you have all of these different ways that you've got table captains, whatever it might be, you've got all these people coming into your organization who are now prospects. You should have several different channels of how people are prospects. But once they become a prospect, they've done something that has now identified them. They've bought a ticket, they've accepted an invitation, they've signed up for a walk, whatever it might be, they're now a prospect for your organization. How are you going to move them through this process so that you can get to the point where there is an ask? Many organizations get to the point where they just do the demonstration, which might be a tour or a video or something like that. They validate that they're excited, and then they forget to ask. And I can't tell you how many nonprofits, especially with major donors, they stop at that validation point. They know that they know people are really passionate, and then they forget to do what in the negotiation piece, which I think of as the identification of what the wealth potential ask is. What are they going to name? What are they going to support? And then actually doing the ask for a specific amount of money. So think about this for your organization. And I even encourage people to map this out with your own different activities and how you do this. But at the end of the day, we have to make sure that we actually do an ask. Here's what it looks like from a fundraising perspective. So we identify potential donors, leaders, people who can be supporters of our organization. It's the same thing if you're thinking about the sales process of how do we get people into our organization? What's our marketing strategy? How are we going to drive them to our website? How are we going to get their information so that we can send them a newsletter or a direct mail piece, whatever that might be? We've identified people who are potential donors. We now have them on our spreadsheet or in our donor database. We then qualify them. This is a really important process that allows us to determine if this is going to be somebody who's going to be in our annual fund. They're going to give small gifts. They probably are never going to move into an investment-sized gift. At that point, we start to break them off. The major donors end up in that cultivation cycle with a major gifts officer on their caseload. And again, major gifts officer could be a board member or a campaign chair. You've got to have one person who's managing the process. Whoever's the connector is a different person potentially. So they start to move that person towards the solicitation. They cultivate them. There's a whole series of ways that you need to cultivate them. And Elizabeth's going to talk a lot about cultivation stewardship the next seminar. You then have to ask them for money, and you have to ask them for a specific amount of money. You don't ask someone, would you please give? You say, would you please give $50,000 a year for the next 3 years to support this program? Because you've cultivated them, you've identified, you've talked to them, you know what it is that they're interested in. You've done that negotiation, the validation and the negotiation. Then we have to steward them. We have to steward them. We have to thank them. We have to recognize them. We have to tell them about the impact. And then we continue to see whether or not this person may be able to do another gift or a larger gift or what that process, it never stops. We still continue on that cycle. And this is the heart of what a major gifts officer does. They don't necessarily do the identification and the qualification, but they are responsible for that cultivation, solicitation, and stewardship, and then starting the cycle back over. It is not a one and done process.
I'm gonna add to this too. Not only is the cultivation, solicitation, the stewardship, which Carol said I'll talk about the next seminar, which I'm also just obsessed with. If they come in at a lower, you need to ask for a very specific amount. But if they come in lower, if they say no, not now, don't take it personally either, right? They're just going to stay in the cycle, and they're going to give you good indicators of maybe why that's not that much. They don't want to give that much right now, or why they need to wait 6 months. So don't take it personally. Be grateful for what they can give or for the information they shared, so you know when to match when they're ready with your need. Showing that gratefulness even during that process is really important.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And sometimes, what they do is not just write you a check that might not be the same amount, but I've actually had them come in and give me more than I asked for. But I've also had them connect me to other people who then were able to make that gift. So being really, really grateful and being genuine in your thankfulness is really important. So I just want to reiterate one more time, annual fund versus major gifts. It's not an and or. Annual fund people are focused on that 1 year lower gift. The gift people are going to give, not thinking multi-year, they're going to be giving 1 year at a time. They're going to probably be running your special events, grants, much more focused on restricted funds, prospect acquisition. The major gifts officer, on the other hand, is going to have a targeted set of prospects. They are doing events that are going to be smaller, no cost, and focused on that high level acquisition through connections. And it's going to be an individualized strategy for each of those 100 donors. They may cluster them, but still there'll be individualized strategies and high levels of data and information collected about each one of those major donors. In a perfect world, these two work together hand in hand. They are partners. They do not fight, they play together. And if you think about that cycle, you can see how the annual fund brings them in. There's a split. Major gifts go off this way to this person. Annual fund people keep the other ones rolling with those direct mail pieces, the social media, and all of those other activities. So you don't need an either or, but you do need both of them if you're ever going to scale your organization and grow. So is there any questions at this point from the group?
I have a question, Carol, if I might.
Yeah.
So, this is specific to our organization. So if you want to take this offline, we can certainly do that, but perhaps others would benefit. The size of our organization, and I understand the philosophy and the concepts that you're describing here, and it makes total sense. But I struggle with implementation and the realities of certain things surrounding costs associated with the personnel. How, when you are smaller and you're trying to build that capacity, is there an opportunity to meld these and have support staff that perhaps do some of the more detailed aspects of annual funding? How I would love to implement this, but the reality is I'm not sure that's feasible. Can you kind of speak to that when you're of a smaller size, how to set this up, understanding that's your goal, but to get there what do we do in the interim?
So that's a really great question, because not everybody has the money to be able to afford a major gifts officer. So a lot of times the executive director becomes the major gifts officer with the support. Well, let me back up off of that. Not really so much that they become that, but they are more of the relationship holder. And then your annual fund, your fundraising development person manages the process behind the scenes. So I think the important thing to think about is that if you're going to do major gifts well, and you may have already started to see this as you all have started rolling out using your pitch deck and going out and talking to people, that it's really important not just to have the meeting, but then to have a plan using your software, using triggers in that system, using maybe an administrative assistant as help to make sure that stewardship and all of those other things are happening. Tapping the board, making sure that you've got board members who are willing to help with that stewardship and that cultivation, identifying each one of those components and understanding that they are separate but important to be wound together. Where organizations get into difficulty, and in a lot of cases, I mean, you're just a great example. When we did your well screen, you had tremendous number of people that had high net worth. But when you only do the annual fund approach, then what happens is everybody gets treated the same. And you're not able to target and steward and cultivate. And so what you've done is the first step of that, you've segmented. You have a different strategy for those people who have the ability to make a high net worth gift. Those are starting to be one-on-one meetings. And then you have everybody else, which is your event, your special, your email, your direct mail campaigns, and things like that. So you've already started the process. It's just a matter of making sure that Kayoko, after you go meet with that major donor, that you have documented how you're going to follow up with that person, that sponsorship grid that you get as part of that, the course that we had. You get that sponsorship grid and the stewardship grid that says, okay, this person gave this donor this gift. Here are the things that are going to happen. Now, who's going to do those things? And dividing those up amongst the volunteers and staff to make sure all of those things happen. So it's a lot of work. I'm sure Elizabeth will chime in here as well. But the more money you raise from those more major donors, the sooner you can add that development staff as well that can handle that process.
I mean, Kara, I think you're spot on how to manage it in the interim. It goes back to that project manager, the project management, and identifying a person that can help with that process, and then using other individuals like your board development chair or the board chair or your ED, to act as that relationship manager. And quite frankly, those individuals are going to have to be involved in the process, even if you had a major gift officer. So, an EA would, work perfectly fine until you can get to the point where you have multiple people that can be helping, and keeping it the same but separate.
Does that answer your question, Gail?
Yes, it does. But I think the challenge is that same person is also running events and the annual fund focused activities out of necessity, because 18 to 24 month closure is a very long cycle, and one has to meet current needs, which is, as you know, looking at the annual fund cycle. So I think what I heard that I think might fit is the project management level individual to kind of manage the project. I mean, just what they do. I think that's probably the best short term, based on what you're saying. And I don't want to take up other people's time, but yeah,
it's a good question.
Yeah, I just trying to make it fit, because I'm not doubting what you're saying at all. It's how to make it fit in the reality of making it fit.
Right. The other thing I want you to realize is that as you start to look to scale, like any business, there's pain points, and this is the pain point, right? It's how do we get to a certain point where we can afford to hire that next staff member, so that we're ready to make that leap and have that body on we can afford to have that person here now. And that's where a lot of nonprofits, especially in the fundraising department, they will hire the wrong person, which can set you back literally years if you hire that bubbly community relations person and not what you need. So if you build the infrastructure, then you know exactly who it is that you need to step into your organization to fill those roles. Project, Elizabeth said an executive assistant, but I mean, military adjutants are brilliant at doing this sort of thing. I've had great luck with military adjutants, and they're so excited to have a job. Coming out of the military, they just know how to run all of these different things. And so people like that can be really good. They also tend to be really good in the database as well, with a little training.
Oh, yeah, I have to agree with Carol, my company works with a lot of veteran organizations, and I can tell you, project management is definitely something. I mean, they're in chaotic situations, so they are very good people to hire. You will be able to, and they master it when it comes to managing different things.
Yeah. And they're worth their weight in gold just to have it in a nonprofit organization. Do we have any other questions? All right. I'm going to talk a little bit about our upcoming training. I know that Keiko went through our Scale Your Nonprofit course. We're trying to do something a little bit different in this next series, and that is an intensive 2-day Major Gifts Officer training. We know that there are just a lot of people that do not have Major Gifts Officer experience. They don't understand the process. They don't understand how to use the tools and templates and forms to be able to do all of the things that a Major Gifts Officer needs to do. Usually if they go for training, they get like a couple of hours and that's it. And it really doesn't help to transmit the kind of information that they need. So what we're doing is providing, in addition to the 2-day intensive where you get a certificate as a Major Gifts Officer, we're also doing an onboarding seminar. We're going to be doing a wealth screen of the top donors. Then we're going to be doing post-seminar coaching. So, and a complete comprehensive campaign toolkit. So when you walk out of that Major Gifts seminar, you will have the skills, the tools, the templates to run your own Major Gifts campaign. Plus, you'll get individualized coaching to help implement it at your organization. Normally, if you hire a nonprofit consulting firm to do a feasibility study, a traditional term, they're going to charge you anywhere from $25,000 to $65,000 just to tell you whether or not you're ready. And then they're going to want to charge you about another $150,000 to $200,000 to run your campaign for you. And they may or may not actually bring in any money, especially if it's that 18 to 24 month cycle that you need to be stepping into. So this is going to build the capacity of your organization internally, allow you to have the confidence and the tools to be able to start your own campaign. And so if you know of anybody that's interested, if you're interested, please let them know about the Major Gifts Officer training course and campaign launch. Like I said, I think it's going to help a lot of organizations be able to grow and scale doing major gifts. So, Elizabeth, is there anything you want to add about the next webinar in the series?
Sure. So then our next webinar and the final one in the series leading up to this August in-person seminar is going to be on June 26th, 3 p.m. Eastern, and I'm going to lead it. Obviously, Carol will be participating. We're going to talk about stewardship. I know a couple of you heard me talk about it at the Keller Chamber last week. It is such a necessity in the process of that continued cultivation cycle to move the major gift prospects through the cycle. Quite frankly, stewardship for your entire organization and every donor is critical. And I just want to put a little plug in for this Orlando seminar as well. You don't have to be in Orlando. I'm actually in Orlando. I live in Texas at this Rosen Center where we're planning on having it. And it's a wonderful facility. I know we have a really great room rate too. I mean, you really can get charged a lot of money to have somebody come in and do these tools. And this is going to be a great way to not only learn from us, but to learn from others in the seminar as well.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. And I appreciate you all joining us today.